Tonight, JD Vance is the vice president-elect and potentially the heir apparent to the MAGA movement.
And I think that we just witnessed the greatest political comeback in the history of the United States of America.
At 40, Vance will be one of the youngest VPs in history.
He's turned out to be a good choice.
A choice pushed by Trump's sons, part of the campaign's strategy to appeal to young, right-leaning men. While as VP, Vance has said he wants to be, quote, involved in everything.
I'm honored to be speaking with Josh McLaurin today. He is a state senator from Georgia, North Fulton County, and knows JD Vance as well as anybody. He was his roommate at Yale Law School and was actually the recipient of that infamous text comparing Trump to Hitler. What are we in store for, Josh? I mean, you've known this guy. You knew him before any of us had even heard of him.
Well, he's one guy, and obviously the executive branch has made many appointments, and we're seeing some of those start to roll out. I think that what we're already seeing is the Republican Party attempting to do what it did with Trump in 2016, which is, all right, he's our way in, he's our key that's going to turn in the lock, and then we're going to try to do more of the same establishment Republican politics. Judges obviously are a topic super high on that list. And if you talk to a lot of, Federalist Society true believers, I'm sure they would say 2016 was a success in many ways because they got 3 Supreme Court justices, plenty of federal judges throughout the country, and have already started shaping judicial policy and the policy overall in the country the way that they want. So I think we're already seeing that trajectory move in that direction. At least that's the hope of the establishment Republican Party. What remains to be seen is whether now that Trump feels emboldened by what he considers to be his mandate, now that JD Vance is there instead of Mike Pence and a number of other more hardline anti-immigration, more authoritarian voices are in the room, is Trump going to take a second or a different tack in his second term and try to test our democracy in ways we haven't seen yet? Obviously, I'm hoping that doesn't come to fruition. I'm hoping the guardrails will hold to whatever extent they can. But let's put it this way. In 2016, we saw a massive uprising, or in the first part of 2017, of protesters, people who were unwilling to accept that Trump represents any sort of status quo. I don't think we're going to see the same marches this time. And while I think some of that reflects the fact that our institutions have incorporated resistance, we don't just have to, we don't just march now to show our resistance. We have lawyers and politicians and journalists who are used to the game. It also, unfortunately, I think forebodes a period of fatigue where it's not clear that America is going to muster the same energy back as in 2017 to fight the threat.
Well, the jury is certainly still out on that, but I think your point about some of the infrastructure of resistance is really important, because we have that today in a way we didn't in 2016 and 2017. I mean, this network, the MeidasTouch network, didn't even exist back then. There is a resistance infrastructure that I think is going to be really important in the months and years ahead. And as to the moderating influence of the Republican establishment, I guess the jury's still out on that as well. I mean, if you look at his immigration picks and his talk of mass deportations, it wasn't campaign bluster. I mean, he's going for it. Stephen Miller is what's Stephen Miller's incoming role? Head of policy?
Yeah, I think deputy chief of staff. So he'll probably be given the helm on something like this. And I think one thing we do want to pay attention to is, maybe Rubio is a DC company guy and he'll be Secretary of State. And maybe Noam is a governor and that comes with some institutional stability, maybe. But we should be looking at the things that Trump can do completely by himself, domestically. Right. Tariffs are a good example. That's foreign policy, but he can just do those. The sort of nightmare scenario of setting up camps or facilities domestically in preparation for mass deportation. I mean, I think that's where some of the more hysterical sounding responses from political opponents and minority groups doesn't really sound that hysterical. because, to build that kind of infrastructure, if that's what they end up trying to do, is reminiscent of some of the worst periods in global history. So we just got to keep our eyes open. I think that we're in an informational chaos era. There are signals and noise shooting in every direction. And what we've got to try to hold on to is, if the worst things start happening, can we break through that chaos with more signal than noise? And obviously, to your point, groups like the Meidas Network, couldn't be a better example or clearer example of the kind of infrastructure that's available to us. We've heard a lot of talk about alternative media networks and how Democrats need to be able to compete in non-traditional spaces with conservatives. And I think that's certainly true, but we're doing that. And so I think we just need to ride out a pretty bad anti-incumbency wave. I mean, the narratives about global political activity after COVID and inflation, I think, are real. And I think that we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much over little nuances this way or that way in the type of campaigns we're running. We've just got to stay focused. It's always been about the economy, back to kitchen table issues. And then if the worst threats to our democracy start to flourish, we got to play a game of whack-a-mole and make sure that we're calling out those potential abuses well before they turn into something even worse.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break here to let you know that we'd love to hear from you. Your comments, suggestions, thoughts about future topics and guests. Email us at info@thekenharbaughshow.com. And make sure to rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, and back to the show. Roan is the perfect solution to that everyday challenge of wanting to dress professionally but stay comfortable. Roan's commuter collection looks professional but performs like activewear, and you can avoid the entire hassle of frequent dry cleaning. Just throw them in the wash at home. It's time men's closets changed. Roan's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and versatile set of products I've worn. Roan has premium pieces to elevate every occasion. We're talking about the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, quarter zips, polos, and blazers, all boosted with functional performance properties like Roan's signature technical fabrics, which stretch in every direction, breathe, fight odor, and effortlessly work everywhere so you can stay calm and collected even when life takes unexpected turns. It's time for unparalleled confidence without all the hassle. Each piece in Roan's commuter collection is made to coordinate with each other and to layer for an instantly elevated look. The collection also features wrinkle release technology and is 100% machine washable. Looking good is that easy. Treated with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, for more wears between washes, you'll be fresh and clean all day long. The commuter collection's premium look and adaptable design is the best way to move through fall. Roan makes it easy with machine washability and collars that maintain their shape for life. The commuter collection's wrinkle release technology works as hard as you do, making every piece perfectly packable for travel. The commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to roan.com/Ken and use promo code Ken to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/Ken and use code Ken. It's time to embody your most confident self. Many of those worst threats involve the national security state. And this is the real challenge, because that's where the American president has really, I won't say unchecked power, but that is an area of executive authority that the Constitution grants the executive wider latitude on than anything else. So he's the commander in chief. If he wants to use the military to set up camps, there are very few legal tools to stop him. And that is really my biggest concern. I've talked about the wargaming scenarios we ran, and the answers from blue state governors and the blue team in general were not very strong. It is really untested, uncharted territory for American democracy to have a commander in chief willing to wield that power against his own people. I don't know how this is going to turn out.
Well, I take some comfort in Barack Obama, generational charismatic politician who ends up giving quotes about how frustrating it is to drive an aircraft carrier that is government. I think the same holds true of a would-be authoritarian also, like Trump or Vance or any of these other guys, these new right guys who have they want it to sound fancy and intellectual, their ideas. It's really just sort of authoritarianism, dressed up for our time. And I think that the military is it's the bulwark of any democracy anywhere. The civilian military relationship, we think about democratic backsliding in the 1990s and, sort of the more recent threats to democracy following the World War era, they play a critical role. And we have the most professional advanced military in the world. And I think you saw even before the final days of the campaign, Vance complaining about how Donald Trump's generals weren't loyal in the first term. And, you shouldn't have to fight your own generals. And there's something to that, right? Both the nascent threat that there might be a move to try to co-opt the military in some way, but also this rich ecosystem of professional military ideals and commitment to the United States Constitution that already exists. And, it's one thing to wipe out CIA political appointees and try to replace them with people, with a lot less commitment to the rule of law. That's one thing, and that's scary enough. I would imagine it's much more difficult to wipe out the norms of a centuries-old military with the types of culture and institutions it has, and demand loyalty to extra constitutional purposes on a dime. That's something you can try to do over time, but I do have a lot of faith in at least that aspect of our institutions.
Well, I'm afraid we're about to find out. And my footnote on all of this is that it shouldn't be up to the military to be the last line of defense for the democracy. It's supposed to be just the opposite. In fact, the military is trained and conditioned to salute smartly and follow the lead of its civilian masters. And we spend very little time in the military. I spent zero time in my training and mentorship thinking about what happens if you're given an illegal order or commanded by an authoritarian commander-in-chief. So I think that's going to be tested. But I want to pivot to Vance, because you're right. He was brought in, it seemed like, in some ways to provide an intellectual veneer for MAGA and Trumpism. And he apparently did that successfully enough, I guess. I found his answers and his appearances on cable shows absolutely loathsome, but he delivered for the Trump campaign, apparently, much to our surprise. How do you read it?
Well, loathsome, I guess, is a word that you borrowed from JD when he was describing Trump back in 2016, right? So yeah. That's one of my favorite rhetorical tricks Democrats have, is anytime somebody criticizes something somebody said about Trump as being too extreme, it's like, well, let's just go back to the Vance Rolodex of things that he used to say about Trump. Look, yes, he's provided some kind of intellectual veneer, but I really think it's at JD's own peril and the whole administration's own peril if they interpret what's happening globally in terms of anti-incumbent backlash as somehow the product of their unique talents or vision or ideas. And, if you talk to the pundits on the ground in Georgia who are looking forward to a 2026 election, we have our statewide constitutional officers, including governor, in 2026. You've already got people bracing for the inevitable backlash against Trump. I mean, potential candidates who are factoring into their decision-making in 26 that they know almost without a doubt that a year from now, Trump's approval will be in the tank. They will have tested all these boundaries. I mean, you look at what he did in 2016 when he was first getting started, the Muslim ban, extreme actions on day one. He has already told us on day one that he would be, quote, a dictator. And whether he had his sort of fascist tongue-in-cheek humor mode on or not, I think we all understand that he is willing to be a bull in the china shop and cause chaos. I think John Mulaney had the joke about a horse in a hospital was one of his bits. Like, there's a horse in the hospital and it's just, causing havoc, and we're checking our phones to see what the horse did next. So clearly that's going to happen. It's obviously better for the country if there's some sort of establishment discipline that gets imposed on him. But I just think, you saw that, maybe, was it Atlantic that did the behind the scenes of the days of the campaign with Lewandowski coming out of the wings to fight with the two co-chairs.
Yeah.
And just
I think Tim Alberta, who we've had on. He's fantastic.
Yeah, just the level of infighting and chaos and ego and personality, and the idea that that kind of campaign culture, that those personalities, the level of narcissism that's flowing through the Trump moment, that's somehow going to just go away with a second term because of some imagined discipline. I mean, I almost certainly that those same types of throne room intrigues are going to feature in this administration. And look, it's, putting my smile away. I mean, it does damage to our country in the process. And so, we can joke to the extent that we are able to handle it about how chaotic and dysfunctional it's bound to be. But yeah, there are legitimate concerns about how much chaos they cause in the process. And we should, to your point, we shouldn't have to be testing things like this. The problem, though, I think, is that many voters focused on the economy, focused on inflation. These democracy concerns are sort of a secondary concern or a distant concern. And, I think there are people who are predicting that unless the American people experience a significant amount of pain that arises from democracy issues, then that issue is not going to feature nearly as powerfully as the economy.
I'm glad you referenced the global wave of anti-incumbency. And I agree that given the arrogance and tone deafness that Trump and his lackeys have always displayed, I think they'll interpret that the wrong way. And it's a weird ray of light to think that their incompetence and venality and lack of concern for their fellow Americans is actually the opportunity for us. But I tend to agree that we need to be preparing and setting up a massive backlash in 2026.
Totally. I mean, if I could sum up in one sentence, it would be everything Trump touches dies. I just hope it's not the country.
Well, that is a dark note to end on, so I'm not going to end on it. Give us a ray of light. I mean, we had one here in Ohio, a co-host of this show, Casey Weinstein, won in a pretty red area, won his state Senate seat by, I think, 12 points. And we've had some positive signs from Georgia as well.
Yeah, Georgia is still sort of in the wilderness right now. I mean, the gerrymandering job done in 2021 was pretty complete, and they just re-upped on new maps when the federal court sent it back. So we actually didn't pick up any seats in the state Senate. The state House, I think we were on the verge of losing one seat. We still got Warnock and Ossoff in our U.S. Senate seats, but again, that sets up a really big challenge in 2026. Ossoff will be on the ballot. There are rumors that Brian Kemp, the current governor, is going to run against Ossoff since he's term limited. And, the conventional wisdom goes that if Kemp is looking at a 2028 presidential, and this is sort of the new GOP that the Georgia Republicans have been trying to engineer, Jeff Duncan most vocally, after, I think, writing a book, GOP 2.0, and then he, stumped for Kamala this past campaign cycle. But Kemp has tried to play closer to the base because he's still involved in electoral politics. And so there's a sense that he's going to run against Ossoff for the Senate seat in 26, at the very least, just to stay warm for a 2028 presidential. So Georgia, we wished upon a dark genie, I feel like, a few years ago to be the center of the political universe, and then our wish was granted. And now there's no end in sight for our swinginess. It's a little bit exhausting, but no, I mean, we are happy about there. If you saw that map that had all the red arrows and blue arrows showing the directionality of change since the last presidential, Georgia had a lot of blue arrows in the suburbs. And whereas the nationwide map had a lot of red, North Carolina and Georgia, even though we didn't win those states, we were moving in the right direction in a year that was a Republican year. So, we're hopeful that 26 might bear some fruit and that we can finally claim our purple or blue state status with some wins that aren't, U.S. Senate runoffs.
For sure. Well, we'll be right there with you. Josh, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Ken. Always a pleasure.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.